We ready to start?
Yeah, man, we're just about to roll the opening intro.
What do you mean? I didn't even get to do an opening joke. Throughout the channel, I've spoken a lot about how I take aesthetic cues from movie posters, cartoons, and comic book art, especially when it comes to detail separation and contrast. And this time we're going balls deep into cell shading ideas to see if we can make a real world model feel like it's animated. Because I'm using water-based acrylic paints and we need something to stick to, I'm going to prime in a matte varnish. I want to use the original colours from the kit, but still be able to paint over them. It's the priming equivalent of... And his name is John C. Get it? Because you can't see it. If you're using enamel paints to recreate this, you don't really need this step. I found when priming Gunpla to give it a little bit of a dusting first so there's a little better adhesion. And I gave it extra coats just to make sure. Triumphant Navy is going to step in here to be our shadow tone for all the blue parts. And by all the blue parts, I do mean this one single piece. Before we talk about placement, we're going to talk about technique. Because it is a little bit different to what's generally drummed into us as miniature painters. Because I'm going for a bold, solid coat, I'm not thinning my paint as much as I should be. Even though my brush is damp, this is still straight from the bottle. And my brush is loaded a little heavier than normal. Don't get it twisted, we're not slipping on heavy, thick layers. But we are going to be using the breaking of the surface tension of the paint on the brush to eliminate brush strokes. But we're still going to be using 2 coats to make sure that we have full opacity. And to add a little bit more variation, we did pull out crystal blue just to give us some streaks of glistening light. If I was going to do this again, I would probably take an extra step up into Arctic Gem just so there was a little heavier contrast. And since we are using a heavier load of paint, you want smooth, sweeping brush strokes. This is going to help us avoid creating texture and rely on the paint to somewhat self-level. Hard drop shadows are usually used in animation to give the object dimension and depth. Ironically, we're using the same idea on a 3D model to make it feel like a 2D image. We're going to be using Blanched Berry to step in for our red shadows. And now we can start talking about the placement. Generally in miniature painting, when we talk about light placement, it's in relation to where we're putting the highlights. But because we're building down into our shadows and we have a very specific idea of what we're trying to create, there is a little bit of different thinking involved. What we're doing here is essentially creating shadow puppets. We've all pointed a torch at a wall, put our hand up and created shadow puppets, and this is a very similar idea. We have the light pushing out in one direction, not the band, which becomes our light source, which means the wall becomes the light's destination. In between the source and the destination, that's where we put our hand, and it's usually to make some really stupid looking dog. Or a duck. But what our hand is doing is blocking that beam of light from continuing to the destination. So for this, we're treating all the raised areas like it's blocking the light, which means we paint the drop shadows in on the complete opposite side. As far as paint list goes, this one is pretty light on the colors and products needed. But if you did want to try this one yourself, there is a list in the description with all the colors and products needed, as well as links to in-games and the Army Painter. And when going through their checkouts, use the code HERESY5 to get a little discount. For the second last color we need here, it's deep grey. And we're going to use this to start casting shadows on all of the white. The legs are a little bit more interesting when it comes to that same shadow puppet idea, just because there's more shapes. And this gets particularly interesting when we start looking at what would be the calf muscle. Even though the ultimate goal here is to make the model read as a flat 2-dimensional object, we still need a little bit of depth and dimension. Which means we need to get a little bit creative of where to place the shadows and where to keep the light. The vast majority of this will be drenched in shadow, so we are going to cover almost the whole thing. But with how bulbous that rippling, bulging robotic calf muscle is, that's going to catch a little bit of light on the front as well. So what we're going to do is paint the shadow into the deepest recesses as usual, but then leave that slender slither of white to make it feel like it's actually got some dimension. And now we're going to use the same idea but in the opposite direction. Going back to our shadow puppets, these little yellow squares are protruding, so they're going to be blocking the light from continuing down across the white pelvis. So we're going to be painting the shadows underneath and slightly to the left, just like an awkward family photo. And the same idea is going to apply to this little hip plate. I don't know what they're called. But we're going to paint the shadows in the recesses and mostly on the flats while leaving a little bit of white showing through. As far as the head goes, theoretically, that whole left side should be covered in shadow. But because we want to draw a little bit more attention to the face, I left a little slither of white just coming around the brow. Just because this is going to help direct focus to the face with the eyes going naturally anyway. With all the drop shadows in place, we're going to move on into detail separation. And if this were an animation, this would be representing the outlines. So let's start edging. And yes, I did have to use edging as the terminology because there's no bases, there's no more rim jobs. And if I can't make double entendres in a paint video, what's the point in having a YouTube channel? This is the longest step of this entire process. And I can see how people would find this to be the most daunting of the steps because we're both panel lining and edge highlighting. And yes, that is a ridiculously small brush. But there is a reason, both for the brush size and to not stress about this step so much. Because we're trying to replicate and recreate vintage animation, I'm not looking for clean, crisp lines. While we are looking for complete detail separation, I'm not looking for perfection. Because older animations were redrawn thousands of times on clear cells, they weren't perfect. And if we're being completely honest, that's exactly the same with early comic books and manga. And so to capture that feeling, we're going to be using different pressure with our brushstrokes, and that's going to create these thin and thick patches, as well as dots and scratches to break those lines. So in this case, perfection is the imperfections, which means we don't have to stress about making everything perfect and sharp. Which is a relief, because with the amount of line work involved in something like this, if everything had to be clean and perfect, I would probably be pushing the paintbrush up my nose until I press the off button. Don't worry, it's not just the whites that are getting special attention. This isn't Congress. Ooh, that might be a little too political. Don't worry, it's not just the legs that are getting special attention. This isn't Congress. Got to admit it, that was a pretty smooth save. Now we don't need any more salty emails about bringing politics into the hobby, because that applies to either side. Because we kept the original colors from the kit and primed with a clear matte varnish, it does make cleanup a little bit harder. And if you're wondering, yes, I did come back to that grey just for another coat just to kind of get out the blotchiness. Even though we're going for a slightly rougher style because we're more interested in creating an effect or a feel, it doesn't mean that we can go haphazardly into it and just create sloppy work. If anything, it actually means that we need to be more focused on creating clear, intentional brush strokes. A little slip here and there isn't going to hurt, but you can't do it for everything. We still want to take pride in what we're creating, because we want to enjoy that outcome. But when you break it down step by step, a lot of these things are very approachable. Don't be scared about trying something new. This is when we should be the most excited. Drop a comment below and let me know, do you think this actually worked? As always, a massive thank you to InGames, the Army Painter, and the best Patreon members in the universe. Big love, you filthy heretics.